Hello, and welcome to Enlighten Me. What if the Big Bang never happened, and redshift isn't proof of cosmic expansion, but instead the result of space itself stretching toward galaxies? What if dark matter and general relativity are really just variations in the density of space, and gravity is space flowing through matter? And what if light isn't massless, but instead light is mass? Because everything in the universe, including space, time, and matter, is made up of the same fundamental substance, light. My name is Cody Livingood, and I've developed a theory of everything appropriately named Universe of Light. In this video, I'll show you how everything being made of light can explain many of the biggest mysteries in physics, including gravity, dark matter, time, redshift, lightning, and even the structure of atoms as dipoles, without the need for quantum mechanics. I'm feeling confident that many of these interconnected explanations could still hold up whether or not the overall theory is right, so I believe they're worth considering. If you're willing to hear me out, buckle up. It's gonna be a wild ride. The overall idea has been with me since even before I began to study science, and it's held up well. I have yet to come across anything that indicates that it's wrong. Space isn't empty. It's made of a single dynamic material, light. Not just visible light, but the very substance of energy and matter. Everything, particles, atoms, planets, even gravity and time, is the result of the motion and location of a wave material. Whether you call it light, electromagnetic waves, energy, space-time, or ether, it doesn't matter. Though ether was proposed as a medium that light moves through, which is not quite right. Instead, space itself is light. And rather than light moving through something else, light is the fundamental fabric of reality itself. This material, this light, fills the spatial dimensions and varies in density. The three spatial dimensions behind the material are intangible and immutable, since they are not a physical substance, but rather parameters which serve only one purpose: to define the relative positions of things within them. The entire universe is a single material body, since space and everything in it are interconnected and made up of the same physical substance, waves that never stop moving. Space, being a dynamic substance or field that objects are made of and travel through, sitting within and separate from the spatial dimensions, is a fundamentally different explanation from the conventional one, but I believe it could be the key to understanding our universe. Things being made of light explains why nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, why energy is conserved, why everything emits light, why the speed of light is the speed of causality, why the speed of light is linked to the speed of time, why everything exhibits wave-particle duality, and there's many other reasons to believe that the universe is made of light. But it doesn't get much simpler than a universe with only one ingredient. Believe it or not, many of the brightest minds in science were fond of this idea or something similar. Here are some related quotes. Some are more explicitly compatible than others. Feel free to pause the video if you want to read them. As we see in the general theory of relativity, space warps. The fabric of spacetime varies in density. It is said that space doesn't actually warp physically. Instead, this warping is said to occur abstractly in a geometric manifold. But I think this could be the cornerstone of our wrong thinking. General relativity should be taken more literally and extrapolated. By that, I mean that space physically varies in density, not abstractly. As you're about to find out, this could lead us to solutions to many of the biggest mysteries in physics. Now, when a wavelength of light is stretched, this increases its wavelength toward the redder end of the light spectrum. This is referred to as redshift. Most of the objects we observe in space are redshifted, which was interpreted as motion away from the observer and in turn being caused by space stretching outward as the universe expands. But we've been interpreting redshift wrong. It is not the result of tired light, decreasing speed of light, increasing mass of particles, shrinking particles, or any other exotic theory like that. Space is stretching, as the conventional theory claims, but they got the direction wrong. It's not stretching outward as the universe expands, nor is it stretching inward as the universe shrinks, but rather, space is stretching toward galaxies. It's possible to cause redshift by stretching a light wave in any direction, and I believe this interpretation fits our data the best. Space, or light, is gathering and cycling toward and through the individual galaxies through things like galactic recycling and gathering to form matter, to create particles, atoms, planets, stars, everything. How else could space stretch anything that's traveling through it if it's empty and not something physical and intimately tied with light and matter? Space, stretching toward galaxies, is an interpretation of redshift that I've never heard suggested before, and I'm a little surprised by that, because it seems to work. It goes deeper than redshift, but one step at a time. Intergalactic space and light are the same physical material which is being stretched. Space is being stretched toward galaxies, so light traveling through it is constantly being stretched as it travels. The further it travels, the more time it has to get stretched, increasing redshift with distance. Furthermore, energy is limited, so the material of space is limited. Just trust me on this for now. As space condenses to create matter, this is leaving the intergalactic space between galaxies thinner, and increasingly more so over time. To an extent, there is still galactic recycling and radiation. But the more space gathers, the less space there is between galaxies. The less space there is, the more it is stretched along with the light traveling through it. This causes it to appear as if the rate of expansion is accelerating, except it's not. In the standard cosmological model with expansion, light from distant supernovae is dimmer because it has traveled a longer distance than expected due to the rate of expansion accelerating. But if expansion were truly accelerating, redshift should deviate from a simple Hubble relation at high redshift, meaning light should also be more stretched than expected. But that is not what we observe. Supernovae are dimmer than expected, but redshift does not show a strong deviation from expected expansion trends. This is a problem because we would expect both effects to appear together if expansion were accelerating. Alternatively, if redshift were caused by space stretching toward galaxies, this should create the same redshift distance relationship as Hubble's law. If dimming is due to intergalactic space thinning over time through condensing and circulation, then light traveling through it would gradually lose intensity, not because of expansion, but because there is less space density available to carry energy. This could be similar to how light scatters or loses intensity in a low-density medium, and it could explain why supernovae are dimmer, but does not require acceleration of expansion, and so redshift follows expected trends, just like what we observe. There is no dark energy accelerating the expansion of the universe. There's not even an expansion of the universe. Dark energy was a complete mystery anyway, because there was never any real mechanism given to it, and it was never physically detected. It's just a bad interpretation. There's also no inflation, which is another complete mystery with no explained mechanism. Inflation and dark energy are more of a problem than they are a solution, because Postulating them creates more questions than it answers. Dark matter, dark energy, the Big Bang, inflation, and the expansion of the universe are all based on indirect evidence. It is very reasonable to believe that the universe began evenly spread out, a high entropy state, which is counteracted by light traveling toward the densest regions in space. We assume that inflation bridges the time between the moment of the Big Bang and when we had a flat, evenly distributed universe. To match the flatness of the universe we started with, it is said that the universe would have had to have inflated by something like 10 to the 26th power in less than a trillionth of a second. But they don't even know how. Inflation was invented to address the flatness problem, but we don't need it. Space has been condensing into filaments, giving us the structure we see. But if this interpretation of redshift being caused by space stretching toward galaxies is correct, it might cause it to appear as if space were expanding faster inside of great voids, redshifting in the direction of where matter is gathering. The universe is so uniform and evenly distributed that it's a problem for the Big Bang. They call this the horizon problem. So they invented inflation to reconcile the Big Bang with observations. The cosmic microwave background comes from a time about 380,000 years after the Big Bang, allegedly. But there was no Big Bang. Cosmological redshift is the primary piece of evidence for the Big Bang, and without it, I don't believe they would have ever concluded that the universe was expanding. We don't need the Big Bang to explain things like the evolution of the universe over time, the cosmic microwave background, the distribution of elements, the cosmological and Copernican principles, essentially the idea that the universe looks the same everywhere. You can have all of these things without the Big Bang, especially given that they all occurred after the Big Bang supposedly took place. This theory addresses lesser issues like the baryon asymmetry, missing magnetic monopoles, lack of galaxy mergers in the early universe, the missing satellite problem, the Tolman surface brightness test, the S8 tension, and major issues like the flatness problem, the Hubble tension, the horizon problem with structures that are too large and too distant to have ever been in communication, no dark matter detection, and the fact that there's no mechanism for inflation and issues with dark energy. In this video, I'll cover how it addresses some of those issues. Our overall historical narrative actually fits observational evidence better if we cut the Big Bang and inflation out of the picture and begin post-Big Bang and inflation, as it were. So if there was no Big Bang and the universe is not expanding, then the universe is not 13.8 billion years old, which is a number based on rewinding the expansion back to the moment of the Big Bang. There will also be no heat death or Big Rip or Big Crunch as the fate of the universe. Next, there's no dark matter. It's been nearly 100 years since dark matter was first hypothesized, and dark matter particles have never been detected. Clearly, we need a new idea. One reason they propose these invisible massive particles that we've never found is because objects toward the edges of galaxies are said to be moving too fast to remain in their orbit. But remember how I said that general relativity should be taken more literally as space actually varying in density? Well, I believe that applies to the evidence behind dark matter as well. Instead of dark matter being some invisible mass, galaxies rotate the way they do because space in a galaxy is denser near the center and less dense at the edge. You could picture space inside of a galaxy kind of like a dartboard, where the spaces on the dartboard are smaller or more compact toward the center of the dartboard than they are at the edge. Space is kind of like this, where space is actually stretched over varying distances in the spatial dimensions. As I stated previously, the warping caused by gravity is meant to be taken as occurring abstractly in a geometric manifold, so varying distances or densities in a physical medium was not considered. They treated space as if it were empty and uniform, but it's not. It physically varies in density. Everything travels through this medium, and its density within the spatial dimensions affects the speed of things traveling through it, but only relative to the dimensions. So objects in galaxies are not actually moving too fast, Their speed is actually dropping off at the correct rate. It's just that they are moving through space that is less dense toward the edges of the galaxies. That's why the galaxy rotation curve is flat. To say that space is capable of waving, rippling, and warping suggests that space is a physical substance capable of moving. In a phenomenon called gravitational lensing, the path of light is visibly bent by great densities of mass, causing light passing nearby that mass to refract, similar to how light refracts through a drop of water. This causes distant objects to appear distorted as their light passes by another mass. Planets, stars, and galaxies are massive collections of particles, and so they are great densities of space. That is why they are able to physically bend space and in turn the path of light passing nearby them. Light bending, as it passes through different densities of space, works in a manner similar to lenses in cameras and telescopes, which explains the similarity in their effects. Black holes at the center of galaxies are really just the center of galactic vortexes. There is a detectable magnetic field outside of galaxies causing shapes called Fermi bubbles or Rosetta bubbles, which have an overall rotation to them. I find the frequent double-sided symmetrical shapes in space intriguing, especially with their stellar winds and magnetic fields. There are no singularities, and there never were. Singularities can't form. Einstein wasn't fond of the idea of black holes and denied multiple times that they could exist. Black holes likely form gradually along with galaxies, which explains the chicken or the egg problem with black holes and galaxies. Space is not empty, flat, and uniform. It is variable and shifting, or dynamic. Everything is made of space and travels through space. The universe is not 27% dark matter and 68% dark energy. If everything is made of the same physical material as space, then all 100% of it is the same stuff. It's just normal matter. Space, physically varying in density, is why light bends when traveling by massive objects, despite light allegedly having no mass. Light does have mass. If everything is made of light, then it has to. We're told that light has no mass, when really, light is mass. You have to ask, when space warps, what is warping? Space is not deformed by mass. Mass is deformed space. Gravity is caused by space, or light, traveling toward the densest regions in space. And those densest regions are the objects themselves. That's why space is denser where mass is greater. Space and matter are the same physical material, so where matter is denser, so is space. That's what creates this warping. That is what it is. The difference in the density of space surrounding an object is typically very small, which is why gravity's effect is so weak. But it increases, according to the inverse square law, as the region of greatest density is approached. Light is the energy that is conserved and used in all physical operations, and why mass is determined by the amount of energy in an object, E equals mc squared. When an object loses energy, it also loses a corresponding amount of mass. All objects being connected to the same body also serves to explain the infinite reach of both gravity and electromagnetism, and why gravity propagates at the speed of light. Einstein's unified field theory was simply his attempt to pair gravitation with electromagnetism, stating that they are different manifestations of a single fundamental field. Mainstream physics has no explanation for what exactly causes gravity to occur at the subatomic level. The mechanism for gravity, what causes objects to move toward each other, is because all objects are made of the same physical wave material, and those waves, along with the objects they make up, travels toward the densest regions in space, and those densest regions are the objects themselves. This is also why mass and energy are equivalent. Though if mass and energy are both a measure of this space or light, then they're really more than equivalent. They're effects or measurements of the same material. If you set an accelerometer on your desk, it will tell you that you are accelerating upward, but obviously that's not true because you're sitting still and Earth isn't continually expanding. What's actually happening is that space is flowing downward through you and through the Earth. It is cycling through. It is flowing through the particles. Space travels through particles because, as you may have guessed by now, particles are made of this wave material. But we'll get to that. Einstein concluded that inertial mass and gravitational mass are equivalent, but they're actually more than equivalent. They're measurements of the same thing, just opposite. Inertial mass describes how much an object moves through space, and gravitational mass describes how much space moves through an object. Space moving is why objects of different masses fall at the same speed. They, and the space around them, are all made of the same physical wave material. It's kind of like being on a conveyor belt, except you are physically part of the conveyor belt. The extent to which the path of a wave is bent toward the vortex can be calculated by knowing the amount of energy that is contained within a particle or object and comparing it to its equivalent quantity of space and vice versa. General relativity and quantum mechanics are considered incompatible. The reason is that general relativity isn't taken literally enough, and quantum mechanics, while it's mathematically sound, as far as interpretations go, it doesn't work. Why would we assume that space is empty if everything in it behaves like a wave? As I said earlier, particles are made of space. They are actually vortices of light or energy. This is the end result of waves traveling toward the densest regions in space. Eventually, they reach the center of that density, determined by the amount of energy in that region, and continue back out the other side, meanwhile creating vortices of light. There are technically no particles, at least not as entities physically separate from the space around them. They are knots in the fabric of space. These vortices can sometimes create particle-like effects, but they are entirely made of waves, which is what gives particles their wave-particle duality. There is no emptiness in the entire universe. The light these particles are made of, it travels through them and continues on out. It has to, otherwise the particles would continually get denser and eventually the entire universe would collapse. But that doesn't appear to be happening. There is an equilibrium to the process. Particles being made of waves is kind of like Bohmian mechanics, where a particle is guided by a wave, except there's no separation between the particle and the space around it. The two are seamlessly connected. Since they are seamless, they have no defined boundaries, and so no distinct size. I guess you would call that a point particle. In the double-slit experiment, a particle is actually affected by its own wave, which is actually the wave passing through the particle itself, and not by other possible positions of the particle instantaneously interfering with itself, as the conventional theory would have us believe. There are other purely wave-based interpretations, such as standing waves or wave packets, that might be more accurate for certain bodies. But either way, particles almost certainly don't exist. I really don't like the idea of them, or of everything not being the same thing. I feel like they just complicate things. In space, there are what you call quantum fluctuations. They're really just varying densities of this space material. When it gathers densely enough, it can appear like a particle is popping into existence, but the space in that region just isn't dense enough to create a stable particle. Also, in particle annihilations, particles can be converted into one another and even be converted into light. Likewise, high-energy particles of light can collide and create other types of particles. The reason two rays of light, or low-energy photons, do not noticeably interact with each other is not because light is massless, but because there is not enough energy or space in individual waves to bend each other's path. Light waves used in vortex interactions are dense enough to affect each other, but we'll get to that. There's considered to be many types of particles and corresponding fields, but really there are no particles and only one field. Otherwise, how would energy pass between the fields, and how would a force-carrying boson mediate between the fields? How does it do that? They would have to somehow be physically connected, and there's not really an explanation for that. Conventional theories' specifics on the process of particle creation are ill-defined. It is not well explained how exactly energy is physically connected to the various fields, how energy is able to pass between fields, how the fields are able to occupy the same space, how energy can enter one field without entering the others despite them existing in the same space, or what exactly energy in the fields themselves are. The answer is that light and energy are one and the same. The material from which all forms and operations can be derived is a product of its motion and density. There's also no explanation for what makes positive and negative charges different. I believe charge could be a relative direction of rotation in these vortices. Magnetism is like electricity in motion. There's no explanation in mainstream physics for the origin of magnetic fields, which you wouldn't need if magnetism was just electricity in motion. If you took two vortices that were spinning in the same direction and turned one upside down relative to the other, they would react differently than if they were both facing the same direction. This explanation of repulsion and attraction due to relative direction of rotation explains why there's no magnetic monopoles and helps to explain quantum spin and antimatter. They're really just the same thing. The atomic model that I will present should help make sense of that. In mainstream physics, they often speculate about a unification of forces in the past, but they should be thinking about a unification now. There are no separate forces. There's only one, electromagnetism. There's no explanation for what occurs at the subatomic level to cause time to flow, and there's no explanation for the arrow of time. If everything is made of light, time must be caused by light. What if time isn't something mysterious that we move through, but simply light traveling in a fourth dimension? Time is unique as a dimension. I would consider it a fourth spatial dimension, but I don't want to confuse you. When I say spatial dimension, I'm referring to the three we're all familiar with. We have up and down, left and right, back and forth, and through, I guess. I can't really point to any direction for time, but there is no arrow of time, and time doesn't flow per se. I guess you'd call this a block time or block universe. It's kind of like a movie with its scenes already laid out, and the now that we're experiencing is really just which frame of that movie we're on. It appears as though time is evolving as it passes from one frame to the next, and we experience light's new current position as it travels through the fourth dimension, when actually all of time probably occurred simultaneously. The speed of time is the speed of light. If everything is made of light, then light is the only thing that is moving, and it has a set speed. Light travels slower through stronger gravity than it does through weaker gravity, meaning that it travels slower through denser space, but only relative to the spatial dimensions. Regarding time dilation, time never actually changes speed anywhere, ever. Time doesn't need to change if space changes instead. We only measure time indirectly using light, which often makes me skeptical about its measurements. How you measure time can make a big difference. Let's say we measured time by counting the number of revolutions a beam of light can travel around some arbitrary point. Let's call that point a nucleus. Light has a set speed, so it would take a longer time to travel a longer distance. And let's say light traveled around this nucleus 10 trillion times per second. Then let's say we accelerate this nucleus to where light's path is stretched so that the beam can only travel around it 5 trillion times per second. If we were measuring time by the revolutions of light, it would look as if time was moving at half speed. And if we somehow accelerated that nucleus to the speed of light, where light couldn't rotate around it at all, because light wouldn't have time to circle it, but only keep up, we'd say that time stopped. Does this have anything to do with time dilation or length contraction? I don't know. There is no time without motion, nor any way to measure it. Our measurements of time are merely measurements of the location of light waves within the dimensions. It is the spatial dimensions that are the absolute reference frame that serves to define the universal now by tracking the positions of light waves within themselves. That is their purpose. Any perceived differences in the passage of time are actually just differences in the motion and density of light or space relative to the spatial dimensions. Like I said, time doesn't need to change if space changes instead. The speed of light only varies relative to the dimensions. Time is not relative, but the measurement of time is, because we only measure time using light, and light takes time to travel. Really, there is no actual speed of light, or speed at all, except relative. The speed of light is only relative because if everything is moving at the same speed, because everything is made of the same physical material, then you can't say that anything has a different speed than anything else. We're going through time, but it doesn't have a speed unless you're measuring it relative to something else within the dimensions. I dislike the concept of time passing at different rates based on your reference frame. I think that idea is just the result of not knowing what we're actually dealing with physically or how things really work. You'd know that this theory of block time was actually correct if you just thought about what if you could view the entire universe at once and pause time. If you could pause time, then it would be obvious that there was a set order of events. There are also some other theoretical possibilities related to my theory, extensions that are not necessarily dependent on the overall concept being true, nor is the overall concept dependent on them being true. One concept that is more dependent on the overall theory is the idea that stars and brown dwarfs glow simply due to the sheer amount of circulating light, rather than relying solely on nuclear fusion. Fusion is a secondary process triggered by concentration resulting from extreme light circulation. Heat, light, and energy are all the same physical substance. Hotter objects typically produce more light, and objects that produce a lot of light are typically very hot. If heat, luminosity, and mass are all the result of the density of light, it would follow that the burning of stars should come as a natural result of being dense space. Stars and planets are on the same continuum, only separated by classification, just varying in size and density, which creates the spectrum of celestial heat and magnetic fields and electrical activity such as aurorae. The corona of the sun is said to be hotter than its surface, like heat increasing as you back away from a fire, which goes against intuition. It would not be unreasonable to suggest that the corona is not actually hotter than the surface of the sun, but instead, the plasma seen in the corona is an emergent property of dense space, and not an indication of temperatures exceeding 1 million degrees. If particles are made of dense space, then the density of space around the sun may be sufficient enough to result in particle generation, even if those particles are unstable. That would cause dense space to appear as plasma. Also, it should take heat waves longer to pass through denser space relative to the dimensions, which should add to the amount of observed energy in the region surrounding the sun. It seems that coronal plasma and quantum fluctuations have the same cause, but in dramatically different proportions due to the amount of energy in the regions being observed. Okay, moving on. Here's another idea that I believe is solid enough to stand on its own, regardless of anything else I've said in this video. Forget electron clouds. Picture the atom as a structured electromagnetic dipole. I'm so surprised that I've never heard this theory suggested before, because I feel like the evidence is just staring us in the face. I call it the twin sphere model, or dipole model. An atom is a dipole that has two fixed electron spheres, one on either side of the nucleus, made up of 4 shells each. The shells have 1, 8, 18, and 32 electrons in them, which are comprised of sets of 2 belts or bands of 1, 3, 5, and 7 electrons, with the belts divided evenly in each shell. And the 1, 3, 5, and 7 electrons together create the square number pattern, which indicates the same shape but growing in size. The bands of electrons in the shells start with the first 2 electrons, which I call the caps, one on each side of each shell. That is the s orbital electrons, followed by the two bands of 7, 5, and 3 electrons, or the f, d, and p orbitals respectively. The total number of electrons in each shell is equal to the number of elements in each row on the periodic table. This makes hydrogen's correct placement in a row of its own above helium, but on the opposite side due to its chemical properties, and because hydrogen and helium are actually in separate single electron shells. There's more to this, and I've also created graphics for it, but I'm hoping to get an article published on this model. One way or another, I'll keep you updated on that. Lastly, another concept compatible with the universe of light theory is that lightning is actually produced by latent heat energy aided by updrafts. The traditionally proposed mechanism for the creation of lightning is a charge separation due to ice crystals rubbing, but it doesn't work. These hypothetical regions of charge difference are never found in a quantity capable of producing lightning. We get lightning in rainstorms, volcanic eruptions, sandstorms, despite sand being an insulator, and in unusually strong hurricanes, but typically near the eye wall where the updraft is strongest. These materials, whether it be water that has absorbed enough heat to change states from liquid to gas, or volcanic ash, or hot desert sand, they all absorb heat, which is actually electrical energy. And then they are quickly lifted into the atmosphere by the updrafts, where they are forced to cool quickly. And this releases the massive amount of heat energy that was stored in those materials into the atmosphere, where it builds up until it reaches a quantity capable of producing lightning. Again, that's another theory which I'm surprised I've never heard before, but I think it works. Well, that's it. That's most of what I have to cover. It's just a summary. Let me know in the comments what you think, and if you like any of my ideas. I think you'd be a little bit more likely to believe what I'm saying if I explained all of these things in detail, which I plan to do in future videos, so subscribe and get ready to be enlightened.